I've titled the sermon, Guilty, because the whole world is guilty before God, and Jesus came to forgive us. Jesus came to make the way clear to forgive us. This picture is called Ecce Homo, behold the man in Latin, because Pilate's going to question Jesus, and we should behold the man, Jesus, because Barabbas should not have been the chosen one. I've never bought one of these. I don't know if you would. I won't talk about it. But for about $5, you can buy a 4-inch plastic bobblehead Jesus that bounces on a metal spring and adheres firmly to the dashboard of your car. I don't recommend it. I'll talk to you later about it. One advertisement for this product says you can stick him when you need forgiveness, and he would guide you through the valley of gridlock. Ha ha ha. The dashboard Jesus has become a cultural phenomenon. In the song Plastic Jesus, Billy Idol sings, "With my plastic Jesus, goodbye and I'll go far. With my plastic Jesus, sitting on the dashboard on my car." Paul Newman even sang it in the movie Cool Hand Luke. The words begin, "Well, I don't care if it rains or freezes, as long as I have my plastic Jesus sitting on the dashboard of my car." To lots of people, Jesus, church, and Christianity are cultural trappings. By the way, church I have been to in Timisoara, Gethsemane Baptist Church, had a meeting. They did a bad job with the translation. They were meeting for the Baptist group meeting, but they translated it the Baptist cult. They should have at least changed it to the Baptist culture of churches, but they translated it Baptist cult. Blah. It's important, I misspoke. It's not important whether you have a plastic Jesus on your car's dashboard, and again, I would recommend it against it, but it's vital to know he's living in your heart. He isn't plastic, he's powerful, he's not small, he's infinite, he's not a good luck token, but he's the Lord of time and eternity. Verse 25, Simon Peter and then Pilate are our focus. Now Simon Peter was still standing and warming himself. So they said to him, "You are not one of his disciples as well, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." According to the other 3 Gospels, when Peter had been ensnared in his first denial, he tried to get out of the building. He got as far as the archway to the entrance. Here, both of the girls that kept security, they had women watching the gate, said to the men who are standing around, "This man is also with Jesus. He is one of them." At least one male bystander chimed in, and addressing Peter directly, he said, "You are also one of them." This is the 3rd time Simon was beside himself with rage. With an oath, he denied, saying this very forcefully, "I do not know the man." One of the slaves of the high priest, who was related to the one whose ear Peter cut off, said, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Apparently, he was an eyewitness. This 3rd question came from one of Malchus's relatives. The Greek construction indicates that he expected an affirmative answer. I saw you in the garden with Jesus, didn't I? Yes, I did. Contrast that with Matthew 26:35. But Peter declared, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And all the other disciples said the same. After all, this man had gotten a good look at Peter because he was probably standing with Malchus when Jesus was arrested. Some of the bystanders took up the discussion so that Peter may have been surrounded by those who challenged him. At that point, Peter's resistance broke down completely. He began to curse and swear. We find that in Matthew 26:74. This does not mean that Peter let loose of a volley of blasphemies, but rather that he put himself under a curse in order to emphasize his own statement. He was on trial, not Jesus. So he put himself under an oath to convince his accusers that he was telling the truth. Peter then denied it again, and immediately a rooster crowed. It was at that point that the cock began to crow, just as Jesus had predicted. Again, the night was separated into 4 sections. There were 4 watches at night. Approximately, evening was called 6 to 9 p.m. Midnight was called 9 a.m. to actually midnight. Cock crowing was 12 midnight to 3 a.m. and morning was 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. The rooster's crowing reminded Peter of the Lord's words, and he went out and wept bitterly. The crowing of the rooster was an assurance to Peter that Jesus was totally in control of the situation, even though he was bound and being harassed by the authorities. By controlling one bird, Jesus affirmed his sovereignty. According to Genesis 1:26, God gave man authority over the fish, fowl, and the animals. Peter had seen Jesus assert authority over the fish in Matthew 17 and Luke 5, and the animals in Matthew 21. But now he recognized his authority over the birds. Then they brought Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium, and it was early, and they themselves did not enter the praetorium, so they would not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. I have a picture of the praetorium. The sessions of the Sanhedrin were likely held in the regular hall of the assembly. For 40 years prior to the destruction of Jerusalem, the Sanhedrin no longer met in the hall situated in the temple area. They feared to become defiled because if they enter a Gentile house, they would be ceremonially unclean. So, because it was Passover, they didn't want to enter the house, especially because on this day, such defilement would debar them from eating the Passover. These rabbinical prohibitions were general and not restricted merely to the Passover week and not based on the presence of leaven in Gentile houses. Here we see men openly bent on no less the crime that judicial murder, yet sticking about a human tradition devoid of divine sanctions. They swallow camels, but strain at gnats. Therefore, Pilate came out to them and said, What accusation are you bringing against this man? The Roman court proceedings were conducted in the most public manner, even on the street or in a marketplace as the occasion arose. Even though Pilate had to go outside, he still had to follow the law. So here, in front of the praetorium, Pilate now opens court. He takes a seat in the judge's chair on the rostrum and begins in the regular manner of a Roman trial. Jesus had not been turned over to the Roman soldiers and been led outside. So in demanding the accusation, Pilate proceeded as a Roman judge should be by coming outside to meet them, since they wouldn't go inside. They answered and said to him, "If this man would not be a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." This demonstration the Sanhedrins were putting on certainly looked as though Jesus must be a terrible criminal. Why not state the charge and the evidence if everything is so terrible, and also so assured, and let Pilate see it for himself? These men wanted Pilate to sign the Jewish verdict and to make it his own by ordering the execution of Jesus. They are the judges. Pilate is to be the executioner. By their numbers and their great show of certainty, the Sanhedrins hoped to crowd Pilate into agreement, into assent. So Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." Jews said to him, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." The answer of Pilate is more to the point that is sometimes recognized. The Sanhedrins have appeared before the tribunal in full force. There was a whole group of them, from which fact he could, and no doubt did, conclude the Sanhedrin had already tried Jesus. But their spokesman had yet failed to inform Pilate of this important fact. He is aware of the omission and therefore acts as though he thinks the Sanhedrins have not yet tried Jesus in their own court. Even now, Pilate is left to draw certain necessary inferences. All that the Jews could inflict was expulsion from the synagogue and scourging with rods up to a certain number of blows. They were bound by their law to inflict only 39, because randomly it was decided that 40 blows with the stick might kill someone. So they would inflict 39 minus 1. It was bitter enough for the Sanhedrins to admit what they do under the compulsion of the present circumstances. But now at last, they reveal what their purpose in coming to Pilate. Jesus is to be put to death according to the findings of their Supreme Court, and their court is without legal power to execute anyone. Pilate alone has the power of life and death. This happened so that the word of Jesus, which he said, indicating what manner of death he was going to die, would be fulfilled. John 12:32, "If I be lifted up, I will draw all men to me." Jesus would be lifted up on a cross. The word which Jesus refers he himself as the time marked for us as bearing this sense, namely John 12:32 and 33. He himself so shaped the course of events that finally, when the Jews had Jesus in their power, they could bring him to death only in this one way. When they sought to stone him, they always failed in the attempt. And if they contemplated secret assassinations, they failed also in this. God was ready to let Jesus lay down his life. Therefore, Pilate entered the praetorium again and summoned the Jews and said to him, summoned Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" It is thus that Pilate asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" We see that the thought of Pilate, and note that he understands the term king in a common political sense. He could take the word in no other sense, for the Jews themselves, whose direct charge he is investigating, expect their Messiah to be a grand earthly king. By the way, I've included a picture of Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Jesus Nazareth, King of the Jews. They should have expected such a king, but they certainly did not. Certainly Pilate could have no conception of this kind of king. Pilate's disbelief is tinged strongly with disbelief. He could not bring himself to think that this man, humbly clad as he is, arrested alone, without inheritance or followers, can be making pretensions to show earthly royal power. I've included as a picture an inscription found at Caesarea of the time of Jesus, saying that in Tiberias, Pontius Pilate was the procurator. So history has a record. Continuing, has the question also a touch of mockery for the Jews? It seems so. Pilate despised the people over whom he ruled. The personal dignity of Jesus does not seem to have registered with Pilate this early. Pilate's opinion of the Jews at first included this Jew, Jesus, also. The king of the Jews, did this Jew think himself to be the Jewish king? Grand king he would be if he did. Pilate's mind had quite a different picture of what earthly kings looked like than Jesus. Jesus answered, "Are you saying this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Before replying, Jesus asked a question. This is not done because Jesus does not know whether Pilate is thinking of this for himself. Jesus deems it necessary for Pilate himself to realize clearly that his reference to the King of the Jews only echoes the charge the Jews made. Jesus, Pilate is to understand, will shape his reply on the original question accordingly. By asking this question, Jesus allows Pilate himself to say what otherwise Jesus would have to. The accusation came from others. For their Christ, a king, the Jews had in mind a false Christ who was trying to be a common earthly king like Herod of Galilee was. Yet Pilate said, "the King of the Jews." If Pilate had anything like this in mind, he would be inserting into his question something from himself, something beyond what the others, such as the Jews, had told him. Pilate does not intend this, and Jesus makes him say it. Pilate answered, I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests handed you over to me. What have you done? Pilate implies that nobody but a Jew would dream of charging Jesus with wanting to be a king. So little, Pilate said, would he, a Roman, think of charging Jesus, the lone captive Jew, with being a Jewish king, real or pretended. We are not ready to add that he felt insulted by the question of Jesus. While that question surprised him, he did not resent it or rebuke Jesus at all. Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. Jesus is the opposite of all other earthly kings. In and of themselves, they are not at all kings. Jesus has king with the kingship that is independent of any subjects, with the kingship that inevitably creates its subjects. In this sense, Jesus says 3 times in succession, my kingdom, my kingdom, my kingdom. This kingship that is mine over against the kingship that belongs to all other kings. This kingship of Jesus is in a class by itself. In its very nature, it is infinitely superior to all that of merely secular kings. Therefore, Pilate said to him, so you are a king? Jesus answered, you correctly say that I am a king. For this purpose I have been born, and for this I have come into the world, to testify of the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Jesus now affirms that indeed he is a king. Pilate has understood correctly, even though he started off not meaning to understand. Jesus now states fully and clearly just what kind of king he is. Jesus was born a king, and he has not usurped his kingship. He is most legitimately the king that he is. He speaks of his incarnation, but he must say even more. Jesus says, he hears my voice as a sheep. To hear is to believe. And thus, to hear and to believe is to be of the truth. That's why Pilate asked, what is truth? Because to hear is to believe, and thus to hear and to believe is to be of the truth. Jesus says, he hears my voice. Not only does his voice sound forth nothing but the truth, his voice is characteristic of his person also. No one else has a voice like that of Jesus. When his voice sounds, we know that it is he, and thus rush to his side. Pilate said, what is truth? And after saying this, he came out again to the Jews and said to them, I found no grounds at all for charges in this case. I want to read the side section. The real question, Pilate's response to Jesus' statement about truth makes him a modern man. Pilate is the disillusioned voice of our own culture. and viewpoint of man. Truth, in the ultimate sense, may be unknowable, and truth is no longer the object of our inquiries. He's thoroughly modern. He's a 21st century man because he's a skeptic. He doesn't believe in truth. He doesn't embrace the truth, and he doesn't think the truth can be known. Pilate is not seeking, therefore, about this truth, nor about any religious truth, whatever. He does not sneer. His word is not of contempt, for the sequel shows too plainly that Pilate was deeply impressed by Jesus. He has heard enough to convince him that the Jewish charge against Jesus is baseless. So he breaks off the conversation abruptly and begins with the business in hand. He goes out to confront the Jews. Jesus was led out behind Pilate. However, you have a custom that I release one prisoner for you at the Passover. Therefore, do you wish that I release for you the King of the Jews? The Jewish governor of Palestine had a custom that he would nominate 2 candidates for release, and the people would choose one of only 2. This Pilate now does, naming as the 2 candidates Barabbas and Jesus. I think Barabbas was not his name. I'll explain in a few minutes. But in this case, Pilate does more than simply to submit to the choice of the Jews. He indicates that the choice he desires the Jews to make, and as we see from both Mark 15 and from John, is they should release Jesus. His name is a patronymic, son of Abba. Notice this. Abba is most probably the honorable title of the father. He was either a scribe or a rabbi because he was called Abba, or father. Bar Abbas, son of the father, son of a notable father. It was a nickname that Barabbas had gotten. We do not know his name. This noble son of a worthy father, selected by Pilate as the extreme opposite of Jesus, in order that the Jews may surely choose Jesus for release. Only convicted and condemned criminals were thus nominated. In other words, Barabbas had committed a crime that was worthy of death in the Roman system. Jesus was being convicted of a crime that would be worthy of the death penalty. And Pilate himself had twice declared that he was able to find no indictment against Jesus that was worthy of death. So they shouted again, saying to him, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a rebel. To say Barabbas was a rebel is an understatement. From Luke, we learn that not even a small minority pleaded for Jesus or dissented from the choice of the son of Abbas. Such a man, the Jewish nation, represented by its leaders and a concourse of ordinary people, chose in the place of Jesus. By this choice, they murdered Jesus and made themselves the moral brothers of the murderer Barabbas. John's word is an understatement, for Barabbas was worse than a common thief, namely a murderer in Mark 15, and an exceptional one in that in Matthew 27:16 for us. The chief lesson to be learned with respect to the trial before Pilate is that one can never be neutral with respect to Jesus Christ. One always signs with him or against him. Pilate's neutrality, attempted neutrality, failed completely. He succumbed at last to intimidation and handed Jesus over ultimately to be crucified. The podcast, The Agent, tells the story of a man who came to be known as Jack Barsky. He was born Albrecht Dietrich. He was a Soviet-era KGB a secret agent embedded in the United States beginning in the 1970s. Gradually, his loyalty shifted, and in a remarkable turn of events, the FBI eventually helped him to secure U.S. citizenship. Why was his nom de guerre Jack Barsky? He found this headstone of a 10-year-old child, Jack Philip Barsky, November 13th, 1944 to September 7th, 1955, beloved son. He took the name of a dead son, at this time KGB spies would commonly pick a name that was an American name that would have some birth records, but a dead child. He wrote a book, Deep Undercover, about his spy actions. Near the end of a podcast, he says, I had a home again, an official home. I put East Germany out of my mind. I stopped thinking about folks back there. I put it away and put it as a part of my brain that I didn't want to access anymore. You always want to belong to something. This is one of the basic things that makes us human. Now I had a country again. Now I felt really good. By the way, Albert Dietrich married a woman as a part of his dib cover, and he married a Christian. She influenced him for the gospel, and he ultimately became saved. That was part of his radical transition from communist East Germany to a Russian KGB agent, and he became an agent for the cross. The Christian's change of citizenship is far more dramatic, because from the kingdom of darkness, he changed to the kingdom of light, thanks to Jesus Christ, our King. Only ultimate radical change will satisfy God, because he wants us to believe his truth. Jesus came to witness of the truth of God in the gospel. If we believe Jesus and accept him, we start our trail to seeking and finding the truth, a treasure in a field that will ultimately lead us to heaven itself.